Hey there. So, for a long time now, I have been contemplating what to do about my past. And when I say that, what I really mean is that I've had this long, crazy ass life. And at some point, I've questioned my own sanity. I've questioned whether or not my memory was failing me. But mostly, I was questioning why me for a lot of things. And what I'm talking about is all the paranormal, crazy shit that's happened to me in my life, starting from childhood to, you know, now. I've been really reluctant to kind of do something about this, but I felt like I had to do something because it's just been eating at me for a very, very long time. And there's some things I just want my children to know about. Uh, and now that they're all adults now, the time seems right that I can kind of share some of this stuff with them. So, what the hell am I talking about? Well, I've got a whole book specifically that I've been writing for about 10 years that I've been trying to capture some of this. And some of it boiled down to I needed to get with an old army buddy that had some of the knowledge, and then of course some childhood best friends, and then friends I've made since moving back to Kansas City post army back in '92. So there's a bunch of stuff that I have to talk about. And today I'm just going to talk a little bit about what happens when you experience something. And maybe it's a haunting, maybe it's a UFO, maybe it's something crazier, maybe it's a cryptid, who knows. But when you have an experience, it sets off this traditional trauma mechanism within all of us that you have to figure out kind of how you're going to digest all of this. And a lot of it boils down to belief system. And if you believe in paranormal and things, and if you believe in things that go bump in the night, if you believe in these things, it's a little bit more easier to digest. If you're a skeptic, or if you're just an adamant, militant non-believer, then this can be pretty even more traumatic for you, because when it happens, then you've got a whole paradigm buster to deal with. I found myself in a camp of curious, but pretty skeptical. Growing up, I doubted a lot of the stories. Even the stuff that I experienced myself, I doubted it. There had to be some other explanation, and it was only upon further investigations and in talking with the other participants that it became pretty clear that my memory was accurate, and these things were pretty crazy. So that's somewhat of what you got to deal with when you just have one, and that's just one experience. But what if you have a lifetime of them? What if you have dozens of experiences? It becomes more and more difficult to come forth and discuss those things, because the propensity for ridicule is exponential. And the possibility of, losing credibility with people that you care about also becomes a strong consideration to deal with up front prior to ever putting anything out. So in my life, I've kind of used the experiences I've had as a little bit of a threshold for how I measure relationships. Because in the business world, um, I've held some pretty high positions, executive level positions. And in the business world, you really don't want to discuss those types of things because, it's a good way to miss out on that promotion. It's a good way to lose favor with ownership. It's a bunch of different things where people just, regardless of even if they've had their own experiences, when they find out that you've had a multiple things happen to you, it just puts you in a different light. And it's very hard to navigate those waters. In my personal life, with friendships, I will, once I'm comfortable with somebody and I get a feel for kind of where they're at in their own belief systems and kind of what they're open to, I will share some of my stories. I tend to not to share all of them because it can just be, well, for one thing, it can be quite overwhelming, but two, you just run the risk of, it's like, well, that thing you told me yesterday was crazy, but now you're telling me something even more crazy. And yeah, so it definitely has its own risks, but I kind of use it as a litmus test of where am I at in the relationship. Because, when you, especially in romantic relationships, once you get to a certain point, you really need to share who you are, and what makes you up, and yeah, and the things that have happened to you in the past. I've been molested as a child. I was molested when I was 6 years old. I can talk about that openly now, and that's only because of the courage of others to really come forth and talk about those things. It's something I really didn't deal with until this last decade, as far as emotionally and being able to recognize it as trauma and understand how it affected my adult relationships with women, up until, about 7 years ago is when I had to break the cycle of the impact that had on me with how I viewed my own sexuality and stuff. It was just a really hard thing to really kind of come to terms with. But the paranormal stuff is even a harder thing to bring up with somebody you're in love with, because depending on where they're at in what they've experienced, I mean, it can be a deal breaker. If you say, oh, by the way, I've had, I've seen things, and what kind of things have you seen? Well, I've seen crazy things. Like, well, what have you seen? Well, let's just say that I've been in places that had a lot of paranormal activity. Well, let's discuss it. So once you get into that stage and you start bringing up all this stuff, it just can be problematic. And I'm very fortunate that Rebecca, has been, very understanding. I think some of it, she takes with a grain of salt, but, it's neither here nor there. Very fortunate that we actually saw a UFO together. And I thought that was like a, yes, I'm not crazy and you saw it too kind of a thing. So that kind of helped a little bit. But multiple experiences have an impact that's not just the combination of the sum. Some of the ones I've had are just so fucking scary that they do impact me to this day. So this channel is going to be my outlet for getting some of this off my chest. I am probably, I would say, 65% done with the book of the same name, Magnet. And in that book, I've found it, in writing that book, I found it very cathartic to get some of this off my chest. But I also found it quite alarming that when I got a hold of my friend John, who I was in the Army with, he had details that I had forgotten about. And the most traumatic thing that happened to the two of us while we were together, he's blocked from his memory. And, you know, ultimately that was the one thing that I needed to know, did this all happen the way I remember it happening? And, you know, there's enough evidence there to, with people that we told, you know, directly thereafter, to kind of corroborate the story and make sure that that something actually happened. But and then also with, you know, my childhood friends, you know, they all had little pieces of information to add in. For example, like after the Spills house burned when we were in high school, I had completely forgotten about the fact that Elizabeth had seen full body apparitions walking into her parents' bedroom. So there's a lot there. So why now? Why now do this? Well, like I said, I think now is a good time for me to do this. And I've always wanted to do discussions with folks about this subject. So what I'm looking for is, since I'm based in the Kansas City metro area, I want to kind of focus on getting some of these stories and places discussed about here in this area. So I hope that you will join me on this journey. It's going to be a really, really, really interesting one. My son will join me on a lot of this, and hopefully we're going to discuss some crazy things with a lot of crazy folk. And by crazy folk, I don't mean like they're actually crazy. I just mean that they're cool crazy. So, yeah.